Perfect timing, Dr. Rao. Thank you for joining us. We are right at the top of the hour. It is 9 a.m. over here in California, October 24th. And my name is Ankur Patel, Director of Sustainability, Director of Advancement at Hindu University of America for this special webinar on the Dharma of Global Sustainability. Thank you all for joining us. We have about 50 people on. We had about 200 people register. People will join us. Let me just give a little framework, give Dr. Rao an introduction. Kayanji, of course, will have some framing questions. But I just like to remind everyone, we are in the middle of this planet's 6th mass extinction, right? The level of change happening in the global ecosystems is significant and does in fact threaten humanity as a whole. We need to recognize that, and there's a lot that we can do. And what does that look like? What is the dharma of doing the right thing in terms of sustainability and environment and in our own daily actions? And how do we leverage institutions like Hindu University of America with experts like Dr. Rao who have written books to, make the world a better place? So that's just my little framework on this. Let me give Dr. Rao a quick introduction and we can get started. So Dr. Sailesh Rao is the founder and executive director of Climate Healers. I'll put that link in the chat in a little bit, which is a nonprofit dedicated towards healing the Earth's climate. He's a systems specialist with a PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford University. He got that back in 1986. Since then, Sailesh worked on the internet communications infrastructure for 20 years after graduation. He has an interesting story on what's next. Make it go faster. There's more important things, and he'll get into that, the story of how he got onto this particular dharmic path. In 2006, actually, is when it started. He switched careers and became deeply immersed full-time in the spiritual and environmental crisis affecting humanity. He's the author of the 2011 book, Carbon, the Occupation of Butterflies, and he also wrote Carbon Yoga, the Vegan Metamorphosis. So Dr. Rao, thank you for joining us today. Kayanji, would you like to give a little bit of framing and then hand it over to Dr. Rao?
Yeah, very good. Great. So very warm welcome to all of you. And, I'm just going to put a question in the chat window for all of you to respond to, okay? Where are you now? Which city are you in now? Just say, so we get a sense of who are all in the webinar. And Sailesh, you can get a sense of who's participating. Warren, Atlanta, Oak Park, UK, Fremont, Phoenix, California, Chicago, Piscataway, Phoenix, Columbus, San Diego, Bangalore, India. All right, very nice. So we've got a very nice, diverse audience here. So I want to extend a very warm welcome to all the participants here today. And I want to frame this conversation in the following way. We've been hearing about climate change and the enormous challenge that it poses, global warming, and when the water warms up and more water goes up into the atmosphere, it comes down harder and in more volumes and floods everywhere. Floods in Houston, floods in Hyderabad, floods all over the place, right? And, the pressure that humanity is exerting on the planet is probably without parallel in our lifetimes. If you sort of extrapolate backwards in time, the whole population of the world around 0 CE, 0 AD, 0 C, however you want to call it, it was probably not even 100 million people. And today we are like approaching, 8, 9 billion people on the planet. And, so what is Dharma in these times? What does it mean for our generation? What does it mean for future generations? How do we deal with the challenge? Do we even understand the problems and challenges Or do we simply politicize everything and turn it into a polarized you versus me kind of debate, which is such a sad condition that humanity has finds itself, you versus me, us versus them, etc. But this is a common problem. This is shared by all of us, shared by future generations, and they will feel it a lot more intensely than we have done. So, what is it that we owe to them? You know, what is the rina? You know, what is our dharma? What is the rina that we owe to the future generations? And how do we prepare for what is to come? So that's a question we are beginning to explore here. We are very deeply grateful for Dr. Sailesh Rao's presence today in this webinar. I also want to gently announce that he is going to be offering a two-course series, two courses one after the other in the winter and the spring quarters on this specific topic, you know, sustainability, the global Dharma of Sustainability, and then there'll be a follow-on course on the spring quarter. With that very brief introduction, Shaileshji, thank you so much for joining. Over to you, and you can take it away in whatever way you want.
Namaste Kalyanji and Namaste Ankurji. It is a pleasure to be here with you. And I'm glad you brought up the issue of what do we owe the next generation and the generations coming after us. It is literally through that lens that I have been able to work on this topic. So I started in 2005, December, actually. That's when I saw Al Gore's presentation on TV, and I was so shocked. I said, if half of what he's saying is true, I'm wasting my time trying to make the internet 10 times faster. So I decided to study that problem, and very soon I realized it's actually far worse than the way Al Gore is portraying it. So I closed my company and I focused on this full time. So at first I wrote to Mr. Gore and I said, how can I help you? And I got trained by him in the second batch that he trained. And I spent a year going around giving his presentation to people. But all along I knew that I had to do something more than that. So in 2007, I started Climate Healers. And I can tell you that the more you work on the environment, the more powerless you feel, at least initially. That's how I felt, that what can I do as one person? And then a good friend of mine, in fact, a classmate from IIT, recommended that I read Anthony DeMello's book, Awareness, which looks at things from a Jesuit perspective, but he's telling, these are all universal truths. We are all talking about universal truths. So he said something in his book that woke me up, because he said the world does not need to be changed. It needs to be understood. And when you understand the world, you will change or you will transform automatically and effortlessly. And then the world will change with you. So in a way, he put the onus on me to look for my own inner transformation and using that to work on how we can affect the world. So I went vegan in 2008, following this advice from from Father DeMello. I went vegan in 2008 when I realized that my consumption of animal products was definitely not good for the environment. And it probably was the worst. So I went vegan and then I visited this forest. So you see the forest in the back of my Zoom, the background of my Zoom. And in this forest, I felt a sense of perfection. I felt like everything belongs exactly as it is. Every animal belongs, every insect belongs, because it was so full of life. And this is in Coorg district of Karnataka in India. So this is the Western Ghat forest. And I was born 200 miles away, in Mangalore. And so I had this sense of perfection. And this forest was started by a couple from New Jersey who had gone to India and bought a coffee plantation and turned it into this forest. So the next morning, at night, I could not even hear my sister talk. It's so full of life. You had insects buzzing around you, and the frogs were croaking, and so it was so full of life that I could not even hear my sister talk. So the next morning, I went and asked Pamela, the owner, how did you make this happen? And she said, oh, we did nothing, literally. We just bought this coffee plantation, we tore down the fences and gave it back to the animals. And they did everything. I said, what? That's all you have to do? Give it back to the animals and the animals do everything? She said, well, we had to do one more thing. We had to patrol the land and make sure that no human being comes inside. And at that point, I felt really small. I felt as if I don't even belong on earth, because I was born 200 miles away from this. So I felt very depressed when I left the sanctuary. And then the next year, my granddaughter was born. And when she was born, I went to see her when she was a month old. And, my granddaughter had this unique mix. She's half Indian, 1/4 African American, and 1/4 Native American. So when I held her in my arms, I felt as if I was looking at all of humanity, because I saw all continents in her. Everything was in her. And then she looked up at me and she smiled. And with that smile, I had this sense of perfection. I felt like, she belongs exactly as she is, and that we all must belong exactly as we are, and that we are not telling the right story. So that's when I went back to our scriptures and started studying them very seriously. I started looking for that story in which we belong exactly as we are. And that has begun this transformation. And this is what I'm going to be talking about during the course as well. So I wrote this book, Carbon Dharma, in 2011, soon after I came back from seeing my granddaughter. And there I tried to code what is it that we should be doing, because that is very easy to figure out. What is the Dharma? How should we be in alignment with nature? Because in this sanctuary also, even though Pamela said she had to patrol the land and make sure that no human being comes inside, she was there. And her husband was there. Her husband Anil was there. So why is it that they were able to live in harmony with nature, but the other people were not allowed to come in? So that started this whole question about what is the game we are playing? Because we are really playing a finite game of growth at the moment. So then I started using the metaphor of metamorphosis to describe what is really going on, that we are in the caterpillar phase and we are being nudged by nature to become butterflies. And because in nature, and you can see that in this forest, every species belongs exactly as they are. And so we also belong to nature, and we also belong exactly as we are. So with that introduction, I'm going to throw it open to a dialogue. I don't want it to be just a one-way conversation.
Great. So I have some questions that we discussed also. If you have questions for Dr. Rao, please use the Q&A box. Let me pose you all a question, just a background question. Do you see that? It's up there. Do you think climate change is a problem facing future generations? You can click yes or no. Climate change itself is a problematic term that goes into the framing of the language, right? Is it a climate crisis? Is it climate catastrophe? However, and so far it looks like 47 out of 48 people, everyone is saying yes. That's a good sign. I will share so you can see as it comes up. And if you do have questions, I see some hands raised. You can raise your hand as well and then I can either call on you and either unmute you or however is best. So people are still answering right here. We got 62 out of 63 people say, yes, it's a problem. 1 out of 63 say no. We had it open for a minute. There's 91 people in this webinar. So we have other questions and just trying to get that engagement, see where everyone's at and moving the conversation forward. If you take another 5-10 seconds, if you haven't filled it in, please do. I'm gonna end this poll and start taking your questions. We have comment from Lakshmi Ji, who says, besides the forest protection and planting trees, some of the serious issues are extensive farming, super trawler fishing, GMOs, transporting food from one land to another. And I can keep going. And I know Dr. Rao can add and give some context to that. Let me close this. So I'm glad to say most of us think climate crisis is a problem, and that is why we are here. And Dr. Rao, why don't you build on what Lakshmi Ji said?
See, on that question
can you
also.
Show the poll result? Can you show the poll result, Ankur?
Yeah, I thought I was. Let me just make sure. Share results. There it is. You should be able to see it now.
Okay. Yeah, I would say that climate change is I wouldn't even call it a problem, but it is an issue that needs to be addressed. And that is facing our generation. I don't think it's for future generations. We have to do this in the next few years. Right. It is as urgent as that. Because if we continue with business as usual for the next few years, we are done. That's how fast things are progressing. So if
that person who said no was trying to get at it's a problem now, then I like that answer for the no there, but appreciate that. Thank you for that.
Sure.
All right. Jai Bansalji asked Dr. Rao, can you speak to the economic aspects of transitioning from the current state to being one with nature, right? The economic question, super prominent in this debate.
Yeah, that's a very important question, because what is economy really? It's about how we allocate our resources. I mean, how we allocate our time and our energy in the service of the whole. So that's what economy is about, organizing that and making it as efficient as possible. And so the way the economy is organized today, we have, it's organized as a finite game, because it's a game of growth. A game of growth is necessarily finite on a finite planet. You cannot keep growing forever. And so we've already exceeded the planetary boundaries in so many ways. In 4 of the 9 planetary boundaries, we know we have exceeded them. In 2 of the planetary boundaries, we haven't even measured. So, and I suspect we have already exceeded them too.
What are the 9 planetary boundaries? I don't think a lot of people are familiar.
Yeah, so the 9 planetary boundaries is a formulation that was done by Johan Rockström and colleagues from the University of Stockholm in Sweden. And I think, University of Stockholm in Sweden. And so it includes climate change, biodiversity loss, aerosol loading of the atmosphere, nitrogen and phosphorus loading. It also looks at land use. It looks at chemical pollution. So these are all the, you cannot go beyond a certain limit. Otherwise the planet it's not sustainable. The planet will just start dying out. And so we have exceeded those limits on at least 4 of them, and 2 of them we haven't even assessed whether we have exceeded or not. So 6 out of 9, we are skating on thin ice, right? So the question is, how that is when you are growing the economy in order to meet the fundamental needs of humanity, and that is the story we are being told, right? That you have to grow the economy to meet the fundamental needs of humanity, whether it's poverty, whether it's hunger, whatever. That is a finite game. And finite games always end. Okay, so the game of growth will always end. So the caterpillar will always finish at some point and say, I can't grow anymore. And we have reached that point. In fact, the COVID-19 pandemic has put us in the chrysalis phase of humanity. So we have been, because it's literally nature saying, go to your rooms and think about what you've done and see how you're going to come out, right? Now, if you want to come out and still remain caterpillars, we are going to get more catastrophic shoe drops coming to us in the future. So the other option is to think about how are we going to create an infinite game, an infinite economic game. An infinite economic game is a game that you can play forever. And that is what sustainability is all about, right? What sustainability really literally means that we can play this forever. That's what sustainable really is. So how do you create an infinite game in which we stay within the boundaries of the planet and meet all the requirements of humanity? And fortunately, that turns out to be an engineering question. It is not a political question, a legal question, anything like that. It's an engineering question. So you can look at these boundaries and you say, how far can you, how close can you reach the boundaries? That depends on the error bars and how well you are able to measure these things. And so it becomes something that we can formulate as an engineering problem and come up with solutions that work for all of us, in which everyone feels like they're treated fairly, right? Everyone throughout the world. So the current economic game is a game of growth. And in that game of growth, we have set rules saying that as resources flow up the social pyramid, that is called commerce, and you are allowed to take as much profit as you want, because it depends on competition, right? If you don't have any competition, take as much profit as you want. So this is why there are people who are, paying $3 a pound for organic basmati rice retail, whereas the villager who grew that rice is getting paid 5 cents a pound. So the other $2.95 was literally stolen from her, right? Because it's her work that created this rice. So we have legalized the stealing from the poor and to put it in the pockets of the rich. And then when the resources flow down the social pyramid, say if someone wants to donate food, donate money to the poor, then we insist that no more than 10% is used for administrative costs. So only 90% of what you give should go to the poor people. So we insist on efficiency in philanthropy, but we maximize the inefficiency in commerce. And that's why we are able to grow and we are able to take from the poor and accumulate it, higher up in the social pyramid. So the question is, how do you make this fair? And how do you make this? Because this is what sustainability is. Anything that's unfair is not sustainable. Anything that's unjust is not sustainable. So it's only justice is sustainable. It's dharma, It is, love is sustainable. Hate is not. So you look at everything that we were taught and you recognize that the struggle for sustainability is really the battle of Kurukshetra.
So, Shailaji, I want to pose a question here, if you don't mind, right? See, there is this particular formulation that is unique to the Western framework of evolution called the survival of the fittest.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, the fit will survive and the not so fit will die. And that is the natural law. And, I just wanted to bring it up as a kind of a counter framing to understand, how you understand that particular law or paradigm and what it means. Because in the end, if the humanity collapses, the environment collapses, and the 9 billion of people on the planet reduces down to, say, 1 billion again,
right,
then we can make the claim that the 1 billion were fit, the other 8 were not so fit, and so on. And somehow it continues to apply within that paradigm. So
right.
What are your thoughts on that?
So that's a story we tell, right? The survival of the fittest is also a story we tell. See, as human beings, we look for patterns in nature and we try to make sense of nature through these patterns. And survival of the fittest is actually a misconception of Darwin's theory of evolution. Because that wasn't what Darwin was saying. Darwin was saying that, a species evolves and there is selection that happens, natural selection that happens that allows a certain species to thrive. And the others to say, okay, I don't fit in this, and it gives up, right? So that evolution does not happen anymore.
If I can just add to that, so fitness has to do with the successful reproductive success of a particular species in the next generation, right? The 3 factors of evolution are heritability, variability, and differential reproductive success. So that applies to biological terms, but it also applies to ideas, right? This whole thing about memes is subject to evolutionary natural selective traits. So again, it's a misframing of Darwin, who didn't even bring up survival of the fittest until like the 3rd or 4th version of the Descent of Man. So that's part of this conversation. And let me just pose another question to the group, to the audience. Will transitioning to a sustainable world have negative economic impacts? Just to put that in the background, you can fill that in and say, let's keep on going, and I'll share results when we.
Right. Yeah. So, when I went to this sanctuary and I saw how well every species just worked with each other to make life thrive, I saw love, I saw compassion in nature. So even though you may see suffering, you see that some animals are eating other animals, and because they need to survive. You see elephant breaking branches of trees, and you say, well, it's hurting the tree. But the elephant stops at some point in time. See, if the elephant went around breaking every branch of every tree, the elephant can wipe out the forest in a couple of weeks. Okay, but it doesn't do that. The elephant stops. So in nature, there is some signaling that happens that tells us when we need to stop doing whatever action that we are doing. And we are getting that signal right now. Okay? Loud and clear. I mean, we are getting fires near our homes, floods, as you said, hurricanes. So it's a signal from nature saying you're done. And pandemics also, the pandemics are caused by animals. So these are all zoonotic pandemics that we now are able to trace. So it's also a signal from nature saying, stop what you're doing and think about how you want to become butterflies. So I use that metaphor a lot, the caterpillar butterfly metaphor, because it fits with our philosophy that everything happened for the best. Everything is happening for the best because nature is so much smarter than we give credit for. So it's nature that sends a signal to the elephant saying, stop, right? Something tells the elephant, stop breaking branches of trees. Now go and do other things, go eat your jackfruit. And then he eats the jackfruit and goes and poops seeds like 100 kilometers away. And you see new jackfruit trees are born over there. So the elephant is the natural spreader of seeds in the forest.
Okay, thank you. The economic question is going to continue to be a prominent part of this debate. Let me share this poll if you can. We got about 60 people. I'm going to end it and share it, and then we'll move on to the next series of questions. Interesting. 68% of people say it is not going to have negative impacts. 34% of people say yes, transitioning to sustainable world will have negative impacts. Any reflections on that?
See, well, when you talk about negative impacts, you're talking about some kind of measurement. And the current measurement in terms of GDP is actually not measuring well-being very well, right? It measures, how many people are in the hospitals, and it grows the GDP if you have more and more people in the hospitals. So it grows GDP if people have chronic illnesses. So they keep taking pharmaceuticals for that. Now, is that something you want to grow? I don't think so, right? So we have to have other measures by which we determine whether we have what the economic impacts are. And with all good measurements, like say genuine progress indicator or something like that, you will be growing the economy when you move to a sustainable world, because you're going to allow everyone to have better well-being, not just us, but also animals. And I think we need to include animals in our economic impact measurements. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if we have great economic activity, if the planet is dead around us, what difference does it make?
One thing that we talked about before was the biomass of wild animals and domesticated animals. Before we get into some questions, I think that dovetails perfectly if you can talk about that. That was mind-opening for me, and I think people will appreciate that conversation a little bit.
Oh, sure. So 10,000 years ago, the biomass of all the wild megafauna are all animals of our size and greater, okay? So roughly 25 kgs in average weight and greater. And the biomass of all the megafauna put together was about 200 million tons. And we were a tiny little blip on top of that, 10,000 years ago. Human beings were a small portion of the biomass of the planet. But by 1970, the biomass of the wild megafauna had decreased by 60%. So they were only 40% of what they were 10,000 years ago. And our biomass, the biomass of all human beings alone, was equal to the biomass of all the wild animals put together, okay, from 10,000 years ago. So we were 200 million tons. And on top of that, our domestic animals were double our weight, roughly, and they were eating the equivalent of 3 times as much in terms of biomass. So what do I mean by that? We genetically select our domestic animals for rapid growth. So they're actually eating way more than their weight alone would indicate. Like the average dairy cow in the US weighs 1,700 pounds and eats about 140 to 150 pounds of food a day. Whereas the average white rhinoceros weighs 5,100 pounds, so triple the weight of the dairy cow, and eats only 120 pounds of grass a day. So you realize that the dairy cow is the equivalent of a white rhinoceros. In fact, a little bit bigger than a white rhinoceros as far as nature is concerned. So if you do our calculations according to that, our domestic animals were triple our weight by 1970. And then between 1970 and 2016, the weight of the wild animals decreased by another 68%, which means they're almost 90% down from what they were 10,000 years ago. Okay? And our weight was 2.5 times the weight of all the wild animals that lived 10,000 years ago. And our domestic animals had an equivalent biomass that's 11 times the biomass of all the wild animals that lived 10,000 years ago. It is completely unsustainable, right? Nature cannot tolerate this kind of biomass explosion. So this is why you're getting all these issues. Desertification is happening. Biodiversity is dying out in front of our eyes. In fact, a lot of species are already functionally extinct. What do I mean by that? It means that they are not reproducing as fast as they're dying out. So meaning they are on a downward path, okay? But there is a way out. The way out is to do what this couple was doing in Coorg. Give back land to the animals and start connecting their habitat so that they can then migrate and meet each other and have more babies. Unless we do that, from 10%, you're never going to get to 100% again. It's going to keep going down because a lot of its species are already functionally extinct. Now, we can keep an animal alive for 40 years or 50 years and pretend that animal hadn't gone extinct yet, but we're just kidding ourselves. But that's the way extinction is being measured at the moment. Unfortunately, it doesn't give us the true picture of what is going on.
Great. From Shankarji in Bangalore, where can we get references regarding environmental issues in our holy scriptures? If you can cite a couple, I think that's always a nice background and framework when we're coming from this perspective.
Yeah. Sri Upanishad had everything coded in the second mantra. Take just what you need from the earth and no more. For the earth and all our bounty does not belong to you, but to the Lord. So that is this idea of minimizing our impact, and also the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That is the foundation of all solutions, the unity of all life. And I'll tell you a story about what happened with my granddaughter, because she figured out this Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam viscerally. She understood it viscerally. Because she asked me a question, Grandpa, who were the first human beings? And I had promised to her that I'll never, ever lie to her. So I tried to explain to her about evolution. So I said, imagine that you're standing on the street and you're holding your mama by your hand and you ask your mama to bring her mother to stand by her side and so on. So you create a long line of mothers on this side of the street. And on the other side of the street, you ask a chimpanzee to do the same thing with her mother and her grandmother and so on. So by the time these two lines go from Phoenix to Tucson, it's about 150 miles, they would merge because both lines are going to say, that's my mother too. Immediately she sat up in bed and she was shocked. She said, what? Are you telling me that animals are my family? And I said, yeah, now that you put it that way, they are your family. See, because I knew about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, but I never really connected it so closely as she did. And then she started bawling. She started naming names of people she knows who are hurting her family, who are killing her family, eating her family. She said, make them stop, make them stop. And she was bawling. And my job was to put her to bed. And I said, wow, I have a baby who's crying. She was only 6 years old at that time, about 5, almost 6. So I told her, Kimaya, I'm trying, I'm trying. In fact, it's my job to make them stop. And then immediately she stopped crying and she looked at me wide-eyed and she said, this is your job? This is your job? You haven't done your job. So when will you do your job? And at that point, I had realized that at the rate at which we are killing wild animals, we are on track to wipe them out by 2026. So I told her I have to do it by 2026, otherwise we are all in big trouble. And she said,
repeat that, please. We're on pace to destroy all or end all. I mean, what is that context? By 2026, we're not going to have wild animals?
Yeah, but if you look at the rate of biomass loss, so the World Wildlife Fund has been doing this statistical survey of wildlife biomass since 1970. So it has this curve. You can see how the curve is going down. And it was, so we had lost 52% of wildlife biomass by 2010. And that became 68% by 2016. So just do the math,
Right.
We're on track to hit 100% by 2026. So that was the calculation I had done back in 2016. And so I blurted out, I have to do it by 2026, otherwise we are all in big trouble. And she said, will you give me a promise that? I said, sure, I'll promise you that. She said, will you give me a pinky promise? I didn't know what it meant. So I said, okay, I'll give you a pinky promise. So I gave her a pinky promise. And then she said, you can never, ever break a pinky promise. And then she went to sleep. And I couldn't sleep. I thought, my God, what did I do? I mean, I have promised something to my granddaughter and now I have to do it, right? It's not a simple thing. And who am I to do it, right? This was the thought that was going through my mind. Who am I to do this? Who am I to make this promise? But the next morning I woke up realizing it is an engineering project. And I am an engineer. I'm a systems engineer. And it's my job to specify how to do it. So that's how the Vegan World 2026 project was started. You can see that here, this one.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
So we still have quite a few questions. We're at about 9:37. Definitely keep on coming. I think we'll have enough time to get through all of them. Dr. Rao, thank you for that background. The next one, and this is going to open up a lot of conversation, I'm sure. How do we convince, and I don't know if that's the right word, as Hindus, are we trying to force our views on other people? I'm also a vegan. Am I trying to tell you to be vegan, or are we as Hindus presenting ideas and paths to the truth and identifying the different paths, the dharmic paths, and helping people along wherever they may be? So I don't know if Neetaji's question is exactly right, but that's the context. How do we convince vegetarians in India that consuming dairy is part of the problem? Is consuming dairy part of the problem?
Yeah. So I went vegan in 2008. I was a vegetarian. And I was, I had this sense that I was better than others, I can laugh about it now because I had this humiliation, right? When I discovered that I wasn't. so I thought I was better than others, right? So I had this sense I was doing the best I can, and I love my pedas and I love my yogurt, but I'm not hurting the animals, right? I'm only taking the milk. And I went to India and I saw this forest. There was this fence, and to the right of the fence, it was lush green forest, and to the left, it was barren land. and I saw all these old cows walking around eating up anything new that was growing on the ground. And they were dairy cows, former dairy cows. So because in that village, they didn't kill the cows. They were letting them live out their lives. And I realized that as the cows eat, there is nothing for the deer to eat. Then the deer dies. If the deer dies, the tiger dies. I said, if I have to, if I'm causing this, I'm actually causing more of a problem when I insist that the cow should live. So, because ultimately it's about biomass being taken out from nature and where it goes, right? It's a simple flow that you can trace. And so I had this sense of shame immediately, when I saw that. And I swore I'm going to go vegan and I didn't know how I was going to do it at that point. Okay. I just knew I had to do it. And then I told myself, I'll give myself a week to do it and see how it goes, right? And at the end of the week, I realized it's easy. It's not that hard, especially for Indians, because most of our food is already vegan. Our base food is already vegan, okay? We just add things that is from animals to that. Whereas for the West, their base food is non-vegan. They start with a big lump of meat. And so for them, it's much harder to go vegan. So anyway, I realized it's easy for us, because I was using coconut oil when I was using ghee, things like this. So it's not that hard for us. And I started making yogurt from soy milk. And so when I realized I could do this, I had this huge sense of guilt lift off my shoulders. And that guilt had been carrying around with me since my childhood. Okay? Because I had realized this as a child. As a child, I'd overheard my grandmother talking to my grandfather, telling him that this particular calf is drinking too much. What should I do? And my grandfather told my grandmother, don't let him drink to his fill, pull him away after 10 minutes. And I knew there was something wrong going on. And I tried to put it away in the back of my mind, but I never really did. So that was the guilt I had all along.
Another part of this is I've heard that 80% of Indians in America eat meat. So is it just vegetarian? What is the spectrum? Like you said, the West's primary diet is based on dead living beings, while ours is at least vegetarian in the start. But what is the gradient? And, I think that's part of, I have a lot of self-righteous vegan friends as well. And that's not what we're trying to do here.
Right, yeah.
Is it just presenting? And Gaurangji's next question is, can you enlighten us to what it is exactly that you are doing? Veganism is part of it. Is it forest management, educating the people who live in around forests? Is it organic farming?
Yeah. So I've been studying, our ancestors, and especially Gandhi's example was excellent, because Gandhi tried to convince the people of India to change their clothes. Okay, but he didn't do it by telling people, you have to do it. He did it by example first. So he changed his clothes first. And then he went around telling people why it makes sense for us to change our clothes from British clothes to Khadi clothes made by Indians in India, and how that is going to impact the British Empire and how that is going to help free India. Okay. And he wrote in the Navjivan magazine in 1926, and I think this is appropriate for this discussion here. He said, I consider it my duty to induce people by every honest means to wear Khadi. So it's every honest means, and there is a lot of persuasion that he was going to do to convince people to do it. Because he knew that the impact of that transformation, of individual transformation, was the freedom for India. There's a larger goal at play, right? The larger goal that you're trying to accomplish. So in this case also, there's a larger goal we're trying to accomplish, which is freeing the animals and bringing back life on Earth and going to a sustainable civilization. Right? That is the larger goal. So veganism is a step in that direction. So at first you have to really literally become vegan. Otherwise you have no business telling people, right? And then you have to give people the facts as to why it makes sense to do this, and let them decide ultimately. This is how Gandhi did it too. So I paraphrase Gandhi to say that I consider it my duty to induce people by every honest means to go vegan. Yeah, because it is exactly the same. It's just like the Kadhi movement, but this is a global movement. So we are freeing the whole world. It's not about freeing just one nation, people. It's freeing the whole world and freeing the animals. So giving them the freedom, because they have been enslaved by us for so long, right? And they have done their bit. They have served us. So it's time to say thank you very much and beg their forgiveness and let them go.
It kind of transitions into this next question from the Twin Cities Nonviolent. I'm not sure what that is, but that sounds nice. Could you reflect on adopting ahimsa as an integral human value and its impact on our climate?
Absolutely. In fact, so when we talk about what we need to do as humanity, So that's what dharma is. So where do we need to be? What is the right thing to do? So we are currently a predator species. So we were originally a prey species, right? Human beings, we don't run too fast. We don't climb trees too well. We don't smell too well. We don't see too well. We don't hear too well. So we are an easy prey to catch for predators. And that's what we were 500,000 years ago. Then we were forced to use our brains to control fire. And when we control fire, then we started building weapons and tools. And so then we became predator species. So we made that transition from a prey species to a predator species. Now we are the top predator species on the planet. No animal can fight us, right? So we kill anything we want. We can do anything we want. We are so powerful. Now we are being told, if you continue to be a predator species, you're also going to die. So we have to now transition or transform from a predator species to a caretaker species. So that is the greatest transformation in human history that's happening right now. And ahimsa is at the core of it. So I even say that we need to change our name. We call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, which is a Latin term, okay, which means the wise hominid. First of all, I've never met anyone who's truly wise going around saying I'm wise. That too twice. So when you say you're wise twice, you probably are not too wise. Okay? So it's the exact opposite. So, and I think it comes from a sense of insecurity that we have as a species. We think we really don't belong. That's why we go around calling ourselves wise. And so I think we need to change our name. And I'm suggesting that we change our name from Homo sapiens sapiens to Homo ahimsa. Okay. That is a combination of a Latin word and a Sanskrit word. So it's a symbolic of us coming together as a species, the East and the West coming together. And ahimsa defines our character, whereas sapiens defines our characteristic. Right? Sapiens says, I'm so wise. And Seer is saying, no, we are just non-violent. We are, this is what we are fundamentally. So I say that ahimsa is the foundation. This is the greatest gift that India created for the world. Okay, ahimsa, the concept of ahimsa.
Well, Homo ahimsa, interesting. I hadn't heard that one. Next, we got Devishiji. The economy and ecology are supposed to be very codependent on each other. How do we make the current generation and masses, especially that economical growth can only happen when the world is ecologically stable? I like the last part, right? Economic growth can only happen when the world is ecologically stable. That's not true, but it's an interesting concept that we may believe. Right,
yeah. So it has to be, our economy has to be completely aligned with ecology. So what is our purpose as human beings? We need to ask ourselves that question, right? So we now know, because of climate change, that we have the power to actually change the climate, right? We have done it. And so when we look back in history, we recognize that we actually always had that power. We had the power to keep the temperature constant for 10,000 years. We did this, okay, in the Holocene era. So now we have, in the last 200 years, we have increased the temperature by 1 degree Celsius, and we have really made a mess. Okay? So we have created a mess. But in the process, we have created all the tools and technologies we need to become a climate regulator species. Because when you know that you can affect the climate, it is our responsibility to keep it stable, right? So that becomes our primary purpose when you look at it that way. And when your primary purpose is aligned with ecology, obviously your economy and ecology are going to go together.
It's almost dharmic, right? Yeah. So Jaiji has like two-part question. What uniquely dharmic values can we offer to understand and address these problems? And how do we get our voice heard in the cacophony, both of activists and the deniers?
Yeah, the dharmic values, it's fundamental to almost all religions. You go ask, this is why we did a movie called A Prayer for Compassion. And we asked different religious leaders, is compassion for all life foundational to your religion? And every one of them said, yes, it's the foundation of our religion. So it's compassion for all life, compassion for all creation. That is, and that is fundamental to us as human beings as well. Because I have been asking people, would you deliberately hurt an innocent animal unnecessarily? And everyone says no. And I say, when you say no, you're already vegan, because that's the definition of veganism, right? So if you're already vegan in your hearts, and it's just that our actions are not in alignment with our hearts. So our mind is not in alignment with our hearts. So it's getting ourselves in alignment first that allows us to be in alignment with nature eventually. Okay. So that is the fundamental dharmic principle that we need to align ourselves with.
Great, great. So we're at 9:50. We still have quite a few questions. I have a few questions I want to ask people, including if you're interested in taking a whole course with Dr. Rao, we're going to have a discount until Monday, $200, $300 after that. So if you're really interested, sign up. I'll put that into the chat in just a minute. We got quite a few questions. Keep putting them in. And if Dr. Rao's up for it, we'll go past the 10 or the top of the hour. The next question, kind of statement. Actually, this is a statement. It's a good one. USA being the biggest contributor and being missing in the conversation is also a major issue. I agree. Jay Bunslaji asked Dr. Rao, I think you have estimated the amount of land that would have to be sequestered to bring the greenhouse gases back into balance. Can you put it into some sort of understandable perspective, say relative to the size of California or some other measure?
Yeah, so we know that if the world goes vegan, we can literally return land area equal to the land area of the US, China, Europe, and Australia combined back to nature. Okay, that's how much land gets freed up. And on that land, we estimated that 41% of that land used to be forests in 1800. So we know that based on fossil records. And so in the calculations that we did, we assumed that those forests were back on that land. So that's 41% of that land. We assumed that the forests were back, and then we added up the numbers as to how much that would sequester carbon. And it turned out to sequester more carbon than what we have added to the atmosphere since 1750. So literally we can reverse climate change. Okay, that's because the amount of carbon that we have taken from land and put it into the atmosphere over the last 10,000 years exceeds the amount of carbon that we have taken from fossils and put into the atmosphere. This is why we can literally reverse climate change by bringing back the forests. But that doesn't mean we can keep burning fossil fuels. I mean, we have to shut that down too. And we have to find alternate ways of tapping energy. And we know how to do that. So it's a transition. So to me, this is like any major transformation in human history has happened when we did three things. You know, we changed how we communicated with each other. We changed how we tapped energy, and then we changed what we ate. Mm-hmm. And you will see these three things happen. So the agricultural revolution, we started agriculture, you know, and then we started writing. And then we started using animals as energy. In the industrial revolution, we started using fossil fuels for energy, and we had the printing press for communication. And then we transitioned our animals from farm animals into food animals. You know? Right? So that's what the Industrial Revolution did. So now this sustainable revolution that we're looking for, sustainable dissolution really, is not really a revolution. And I'll show you what the distinction is. In this transformation, it's the internet for communication. So we are able to now talk to each other from around the world, right? It is veganism for food and for our attitude changes. And for energy, it's solar energy and wind energy and those things, you know, those that can be tapped without having to burn things.
Great. Lieutenant Colonel Prakash Joshi has a kind of interesting statement. We have people like Dr. David Sinclair. There's a lot of congruence between our thinking and Western thinking in terms of sustainability, but our scriptures, they don't know about them. How do we bring like-minded people together and build world opinion for this urgent cause of preserving nature, sustaining it, finding balance, and integrating all efforts? And, you know, I think that's part of what it means, your work, right? You've connected not just from the Al Gore network, but the Hindu network to your engineering network. If, again, because of time, if you want to take a quick 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's really about having more and more dialogues with people, and internet is allowing us to do that. The kind of dialogue we are having here from across the world, and then there are lots of dialogues happening in the COVID-19 era now. There's so many Zoom meetings happening everywhere. So it's about getting to those meetings and then contributing to the dialogue. That's how we are going to reach consensus. That we all agree that maybe we need to do things differently. And what real sustainability means, authentic sustainability really means. So, because it is about transforming our finite game into an infinite game. And so we need to understand the rules of the infinite game that we are creating, right? And how it has to be in alignment with nature and all that.
Right. So there's conversations going in the chat, and some people put some of those comments also in the Q&A box. That's fine. During the beginning of the pandemic, we saw changes in clean air and clean environment. Lakshmiji said that. Uday Kumarji says a different way of framing that initial economic question, an equally good question, is will not addressing the question have economic impacts, right? Not addressing the sustainability issue will have economic impacts. Will the collapse of agriculture in India have such an impact? And of course, right? Thank you for that reframing. And there was a whole conversation, different people. And I apologize for wording that question so simply. It was just a way to get conversation going. Destruction, Lakshmiji has a couple of statements. Destruction of the Amazon has to stop, agreed. Two-child policy may be of help. Oh, population control. What do you think about that? That's a complicated idea. And maybe you have some thoughts on that.
It's when we talk about population explosion and all that, we are really framing it in a very colonial sense. Because in the colonial framing, we say that there is a certain need, which is mostly manufactured need, for material well-being. And if everyone has a car in their garage, like I do, the planet cannot have more than 2 billion people, right? Something like that. And based on that, then you say, well, 6 billion people have to disappear somehow. Or we need to start controlling population by force. And I think that's a wrong framing, because the framing is always, given what we have, how can we optimize the way we live, right? So that everyone gets their basic needs met, and we are able to fulfill our true role as a climate regulated species of the planet, okay? So we can then frame it like that. And so this is the donut economics. And I'm going to be talking about that during the second course. We'll go into details on donut economics of Kate Raworth. And so then, it becomes, you will automatically do it, because as women get more and more educated, they automatically have less children. Okay, so you don't have to do any control. It doesn't have to be a top-down directive from anyone. It's making sure that everyone feels like they belong, first and foremost, right?
Great. Yeah. Educated women have fewer children across religion, economics, geography, aid, everything. That's part of it. I appreciate that. I do have about 5 questions on diet that I was curious, and you had suggested some. I'm going to put those up. Feel free to answer them, and we'll continue to answer questions, and we'll look at the answers to these questions on diet. Again, that's one of the things that we've definitely emphasized. There's so many others. Devji says, the concentration of wealth in the hands of the few seems to be the ultimate expression of ignorance under Maya. Some are so consumed with material success that they hoard more wealth than they could ever spend. Nearly everyone else would like to be in that position. Since we are in the age of Kali, how can we possibly expect that this ignorance will dispel?
Yeah, this is really the battle of Kurukshetra, right? So it is the two sides are now gathering momentum, is to say which way we want to go. If we go the old way and continue the old way, then we know where we're going. I mean, that's what science is telling us. We are going to kill all the wild animals by 2026. We're going to wipe out, once they are dead, we're going to die too. So there's no question. There is no valid ecosystem with just human beings and cockroaches and, maybe a few crops. There is no such ecosystem. So we have to figure out, how do we get to sustainability and get to the kind of thriving along with nature, and show people that there is no need to hoard, that you belong exactly as you are, and what are you hoarding for? What are we hoarding really? Just some numbers, right? In a computer. That's all it is. And you can maybe convert that into pieces of paper with pictures of Gandhi on it, or maybe pictures of dead presidents on it. But that's about it. Ultimately, it is an agreement between human beings saying that we will do things for you if you had these pieces of paper, right? So ultimately, you're tapping into the potential of human beings. And if human beings say that, we need a different game, we need to be playing a different game, the hoarding game no longer works for us, you're done hoarding. Right? That game goes away.
Yeah.
So all finite games end.
And that's part of it, right? Turning it into a non-zero sum game. That's the transformation. Double G asks, where do we go from here? Vegetarian, being vegan, that's not enough. And then following up, Devashiji says, how is mass consumerism affecting the ecology? That kind of taps into that prior question as well. I'm going to try and combine some questions so that we can continue moving. Yeah, basically, mass consumerism is to create the flow of resources. So if you have demand for consumer products, then there is more flow of resources that happen. And we have a game in which we have to grow. If we don't grow, the game collapses. Okay, that's the finite game we are playing, the game of the caterpillar. And so this is why we induce more and more consumption to happen so that we can grow the game. And that's how money is being fished back from the bottom back to the top. Because what happens, the way we architected the game, money is only created by a few people. Okay? We don't even know who they are, by the way. That's the crazy part, right? We don't even know who they are because they're all private individuals and they don't have to disclose who they are. So there are 4 financial holding companies that own almost every corporation on the planet, controlling interests in them. So these 4 financial holding companies are private companies, so they don't have to disclose their shareholders. So these people are generating the money, and then they're giving it to people as loans. And then they're trying to fish that back to themselves. That's the way the economy creates flows. And so this is why consumerism is fundamental to the game of the caterpillar. Okay? Because that's what a caterpillar does, eat, right? So, but a butterfly sips nectar from flowers and in the process pollinates the flowers and regenerates life. So that is the transformation that's happening, Right. And so we're going to talk about, initially in the first course, I'm going to be talking about the Dharma of Global Sustainability, which is what is the right thing to do. So we talk about how do you frame the story. So it's really about the story, how do you frame the story and what is this transformation, making sense of the transformation that's happening now, because the vegan movement is growing so fast, right? If it just goes like this, it is going to explode. So anyway, that is the Dharma of Global Sustainability. And then in the Yoga of Global Transformation, the next course that I'm teaching in the spring quarter, then we'll talk about how do we create this new game? Yes. And what are the components of the new game? Great. So that's one thing that you can do to continue this. Enroll in the course. I've dropped the link in there. Again, we're giving you it's going to be $200 until Monday, and then it's going to go up to full price at $300. I think it'd be amazing to get 30, 40, 50 people in this course and turn it into something that has, and it builds on what Saileshi has been doing, gives them energy and momentum, and we keep on this. I have this poll on diet in progress. 48 people have completed it. I'm going to share screen just for a little bit so you can see. It's kind of interesting to see these results as they come in. Another question Gaurangji asks is, he's a vegetarian, but one question he gets is, what happens to the animals if we go vegetarian? Wouldn't these billions of animals consume all the plants and trees? What would happen to all these animals? I'm sure you have a quick answer for that. So if you look at the lifespan of an animal, a domestic animal today, they live about, on average, about 10% of their natural lifespan. Okay, so they are really literally being killed as babies on average. And so they are really not reproducing by themselves. Okay, so they are being reproduced in industrial factories
Majority of animals are being produced in factories. They're sent out as babies. So you can order babies, and they come from the factory. And so it is this industrial production of animals that's happening right now. And that needs to stop. When that stops, as the demand dies down, that stops because they're not making money off of it anymore.
Yeah.
So
Let
then,
me just add,
yeah,
go ahead, sorry.
Go for it.
On that point, it just jogged my memory. There's the moral argument is so powerful, and there are babies. I have been at pig vigils at Farmer John's in Vernon, where these pigs are shipped from across the country without water in cages, and right before they go into Farmer John's, we give them a little bit of water, and you can see they're living beings. Pigs are smarter than dogs, and they're 6 months old, being taken, and the last little mercy that we can provide them is give them a little bit of water. Overall, the moral argument, especially in America, desi ghee, that might be a little bit different than American factory farm. And if you're paying that extra $1, $2, $3 for that, grass-fed cow milk, there's all this different stuff that we have to get in. And Ramya Raj is asking about the guilt of missing out on required vitamins and minerals from vegetarian sources, calcium, bone health, is a reason for many Indians, and he's asking for advice on that, how to give confidence on the veg sources alone. Well,
the statistics show that people who turn vegan actually increase their intake of nutrients. Because, right now, 95% of Americans don't get enough magnesium in their diet. They don't get enough fiber in their diet. I mean, this is just ridiculous. This is why people are getting more and more obese over time, because they're not getting enough nutrients. This is why their body says, keep eating more and more and more. Because, we have this mechanism in our body that knows when to stop, right? So this is why animals don't overeat, because they're eating straight from nature. So if we eat a whole food plant-based diet, we will get all the nutrients we need, and our body will tell us you have enough, that you don't have to eat anymore. If you're lacking some nutrients, your body will say, keep eating. Okay? And that's a signal for you to figure out what is going on.
Yeah, I'm going to end the poll because what you just touched on, and I will share the results. Very interesting, I think. Take a look. So we have about 80% of people who answered are vegetarian, 20% are not. 17% are vegan, 83% are not. These are some questions that Saileshi asked. I'm sure you're curious to see if you want to make some feedback on them.
Absolutely, yeah.
Any thoughts?
So go down. I mean, do you think the world will be vegan? Oh, you're going to ask me about the first two.
Yeah. So do you think the world will be vegan by 2026? 91% of our audience says no. Do you think the world will ever be vegan? I added that just to see if there's some gray area there. 66% of people said no. So there's about 30% of people, 25% of people who said someday the earth will be, humans will be vegan.
Right.
And then the next one, Forbes magazine, the percentage of increase in vegans between 2014 and 2017 in the US was, our audience thinks it was 6%, but it was 600%, right?
Right.
Yeah, because it wasn't so big in the first place, and it has been a significant growth. So 600% increase. And just to piggyback on one of the questions Double G asked, he brings up Kadhi, right? You use that example, that was 1926, today is 2020. How does that example and this vegan kind of parallel, different? What are the...
Right, yeah.
Where did that
so
go?
The Kadhi movement in 1926, when Gandhi wrote that in Navjivan magazine, I mean, he was trying to persuade people. He was using his magazine to reach out to people and persuade them to wear Kadhi. And people, there was a lot of opposition to Kadhi movement. People were saying, look, it's more expensive than British clothes. This is why Gandhi said, okay, look at me. I'm not going to wear any shirt anymore. So he said, look at my clothes. They're less expensive than British clothes because I'm just wearing a loincloth, right? Because you're in India. And so he set an example for the Kadhi movement. And by 1930, almost everyone in India was wearing Kadhi. It became a sign of alignment with the freedom movement.
Yes.
Okay? And this is why the British imposed the salt tax, because they were not getting any revenues from clothing. And they said, well, the Indians have to eat salt anyway, so let's put tax on salt and get money from them that way. And so Gandhi went to the ocean and made salt and said, I'm not going to pay you a single paisa of tax for this. Right? So the whole movement started because the Kadhi movement was so successful. And then the British negotiated with Gandhi because they realized he had the power to move the people. So that was 1926 to 1930. In 4 years, he accomplished so much, right? Mm-hmm. Of course, the Kadhi movement started in 1919, but same way, so the 600% increase that happened between 2014 and 2017, if we maintain that momentum, the same exponential growth, it will be 100% of vegans by 2026. Okay, but
that's a little wishful thinking, Sailesh G. I'll call you on that, but I appreciate that. The last question in the poll that I added: do you think eating fewer animal products will improve your health? 94% of people said yes. 94% of people know, or at least think or believe, that eating fewer animal products will help your health. So those are the kind of the three arguments, right? The health, the sustainability, and the moral argument. I'm going to stop sharing these. I have one last poll that I definitely want you to answer before you start taking off, and it's about enrollment. So if you are interested in enrolling in the Global Dharma of Sustainability, it's going to start in January. Click that yes button. No, maybe I have questions. We'll have Pragya Ji or somebody else from our team call you and answer your questions. Maybe later, because this is a 2-course part, I don't know, is your second course going to require the first one as a prereq, or will people be able to jump into that second one if they...
they can pretty much do both independently. Yeah.
Perfect. Good.
Books, yeah. Because they're based on my 2 books, Carbon Dharma and Carbon Yoga.
Why don't you talk about them a little bit?
Yeah, so I wrote Carbon Dharma in 2011, and so the course is designed around each chapter in the book. And so I'm going to be, because Dharma is very easy to figure out, you have to be kind to all life. This is not complicated. We learned this in kindergarten, right? What is the right thing to do? So I wrote that first because I was so inspired after seeing my granddaughter. And then I spent 6 years researching how do we do this. So that is the yoga of global transformation. Because so Dharma is what do we need to do? Yoga is how do we do it? So this is why these are relatively independent courses. Yeah.
Great. So again, it's going to start in January. The details are in the link that I just dropped in the chat. Please enroll soon. You get that $100 discount if you do it by Monday. And we have a couple more questions. We'll get through them. Thank you, Dr. Rao, for being so generous with your time and answering questions. I appreciate the conversation. If you have any more, please drop them. Oh, no, you are. Okay, good. So where are you in policy change efforts to make the world go vegan? And will it be possible to have this transformation during this Biden-Harris administration? Just my own comment, they're still supporting fracking. They're not looking at the environment in that holistic way. There's a nice plan, but I don't know if it's going to come from that top-down kind of policy level. But Dr. Rao, what is your role in that? And how do we make it easier for people to make, in our opinion, the right, the dharmic, the moral decision?
Right. Just like any major movement, any major transformation in human history, it comes from the bottom up. Because the leaders are really representing the current power structure. So they are going to be doing everything they can to preserve the power structure because that's their job. That's what they have been told to do. This is like saying, can we get India independence by going and just asking the British to give us independence? No, you had to do something, right? We had to free ourselves first from within, So that is really what even Father Anthony de Mello was saying. You have to transform yourself if you want the world to change around you. So the policy questions, we have to keep going to the policy discussions and giving our input. We have to keep growing our movement, but don't expect them to lead it for you. So it's until we become a majority, they're not going to do it. Okay, and of course, once we become a majority, they'll be our best friends. That always happens, right?
That's politics. So this recording will be made available. You can share it. Please fill out the survey that you'll get after, and this webinar recording will be made available. And I please share it. Right. Another question: if we stop eating yogurt, how do we get our probiotics? Where do probiotics come from?
Yeah. So there is Somna Sachdev has made this excellent video, and it's on our Facebook page about how to make cashew yogurt, how to make peanut yogurt. We can make soy yogurt. So there's so many. So if you just type vegan yogurt on YouTube, you will see so many ways of doing it. And you will get the same probiotics. Basically, it is the same fermenting process that happens because the bacteria just like the protein, you know, they convert any protein into that fermented version. So yeah, so I have cashew yogurt. I'm using that right now. And because I followed Somna's recipe, and it works beautifully. You can't even tell the difference.
Great. Okay, that kind of goes to the end of the questions in the Q&A box. I see a hand up, but that's from Lieutenant Colonel Prakash Joshi. I think we answered your question. I'll put your hand down. I'm going to go through the chat. Saileshi, closing thoughts. I think we're there. Last questions will be coming in, but we're at 10:15. I think we took everyone's questions. Closing thoughts, last pitch to join your course. I'm making that too. Please join this course. I'm going to take this course in January for sure. I'm looking forward to this. I actually did my undergraduate at UCLA in ecology, behavior, and evolution. It was also kind of inspired by a presentation of Inconvenient Truth back in my undergraduate days at different paths, but not to idolize or put anybody up on a pedestal. But again, there's lots of paths to getting the information, and then it's up to us to share it, assimilate it, understand it, make it our own, put the dharmic perspective on it, and move forward. So Dr. Ra, Dr. Saileshi, your closing thoughts. Thank you.
Fundamentally, to me, it is about returning back to faith. And that's the gift that my granddaughter gave me. You know, when I saw her and she convinced me that we belong exactly as we are, that is a return back to faith. Okay? That is a return back to understanding that we are part of a larger intelligence. And so to me, framing it this way and framing the sustainability question as an infinite game and recognizing that we are playing a minor part, just like the elephant was breaking branches of trees, we are heating up the earth. And we did that for a purpose, and now we are being asked to transform. So that in that way, I have been able to be at peace with myself, even though the task before me looks really big. and I know that everyone is helping. You know, we are all in this together. So it's literally about getting all of us in alignment and throughout the world, not just among Hindus and Indians, but throughout the world, we have to come together. And it's the East and the West coming together. So putting the best of both worlds together, you know, because in India, we have been so blessed by our ancestors with all this knowledge about the inner world. And in the West, we have been so blessed with all this knowledge about the material world, how to change the material world. And it's about putting the two together for the purpose of life, in service of life. And that is the transformation that's happening. And I'm so grateful to you for this opportunity, to all of you for being here. And I'm complete. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it all. Namaste all. Thank you for joining us. Look forward to the next one. Namaste all.